Food insecurity in America is a serious crisis right now. We just had the Thanksgiving holiday and we actually got to see on display just how desperate some Americans are becoming. So stick around for the rest of the video and we're going to talk about how the food insecurity situation we're having right now is a major indicator of SHTF to come. Hey everybody, it's Magic Prepper, and today we're going to talk about food insecurity in America and how it has become exasperated because of the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic, and what that means for us here in the future. Right now, people around the country are experiencing losses when it comes to their income, when it comes to their businesses, and when it comes to their ability to put food on the table. And it's a major situation we have to keep our eye on right now because honestly, it's very concerning with how rapidly this food insecurity situation is growing. And it's something that you should be prepared for and that we should all be preparing for as of right now. You should be making sure that you have food stores and food supplies in order to survive a long winter based on the economic conditions we're seeing happening around the country. So if you're preparing to make it through a food insecurity crisis that we're all seeing happening right now, hit the subscribe button below because we need to stay on top of what's happening, and as a community, it's possible we might end up having to help each other out when it comes to the ability to eat, because that's what's happening around this country right now. So here's some numbers for you to kind of give you some ideas about what's going on, okay? 1 out of 8 Americans said that they didn't have enough food on their table last week. We're talking about during Thanksgiving. 1 out of 8 Americans. And that's American families with children, because honestly, the more people you put into a household, the harder and harder it is to provide food for all those mouths, right? So if you think of it that way, 1 out of every 8 families in this country is saying they didn't have enough food to eat, okay? So think about when you go to any area of gathering or fellowship, maybe it's at work, maybe you go to church, maybe it's something along those lines. 1 out of 8 of each of those families you interact with probably didn't eat enough food, okay? So just to put things in perspective, that's where we're at right now. Now, that being said, we're actually projected to see by the end of 2020, 1 out of 6 American families not being able to have enough food on the table at any given time. And that's a huge increase and a huge number, okay? That's about 17% of the entire country not eating enough, okay? So low-income families are disproportionately affected by this food crisis and the insecurity involving food that we're seeing right now. And a big part of that is because if you already were in a tough situation when it came to income and when it came to your ability to pay your bills, maybe you're living paycheck to paycheck every single week, and then the pandemic hit. Maybe you lost your job, maybe you lost your ability to earn extra income. I know a lot of companies cut overtime immediately once everything started. So maybe your financial breathing room was taken away. Well, those people are on the edge of not being able to eat every single day they go without knowing if they're going to have additional income or not. And low-income families were affected by this whole situation the worst, of course. You know, it lasts longer for them, it's harder for them to recover from, and they already were most likely struggling in one form or another financially, and now it's gotten to the point where that financial struggle has turned into a starvation struggle. So that is exactly where the country is right now. It's a dangerous indicator of SHTF events to come, okay? But we'll talk about that here in a second. Some other details that have come out after last week during the Thanksgiving holiday that we have to pay attention to is the length of lines for food banks for distributing holiday meals, okay? It was incredible at different areas around the country to see lines of cars lined up and waiting for 5 hours to get a meal, because they wanted to make sure their family had something to eat for the holiday, okay? So those lines were unprecedented. They haven't been seen by most of these food banks in a very long time, or even since, I believe 1998 was one of the last times, or the first times we started tracking people's ability to put food on the table. Nothing has been seen like that since then. So you have to consider that we're talking, 22 years. This is the worst year so far. And we all know it's because of the effects of the pandemic, the lockdowns and the restrictions that have taken away people's jobs or ability to access food is causing a lot of issues. But huge lines at food giveaways for the holiday, where you even look through some of the photos or some of the video of these lines, and there's people in all different types of vehicles. This isn't just affecting the lowest of the low income families, it's also affecting people who are driving Range Rovers and Mercedes and BMWs because they probably have similar financial issues as the other people around them now. It's because they were living a certain way based on an income expectation that they had that is no longer there, no longer exists. So some people are coming to these food bank distribution centers for the first time in their entire lives. So this is a whole new set of people that aren't used to struggling this way, which is another reason why these are all dangerous indicators of how SHTF is coming soon possibly, or at least on the horizon, and how we need to watch out for it. But before we get to that, okay, I know I keep stalling, but here's just some ideas for you, okay? In many regions, demand for food distribution in order to combat food insecurity for different families around the country has tripled just since the start of the pandemic. Tripled. So you have to assume that these food banks, they budget for the year as any other nonprofit or business would in order to try to estimate what their resources are going to be, okay? What they have to acquire in order to provide what they're putting out there. If demand has tripled since just the beginning of this year, you guarantee they're not being able to keep up. And they're saying they can't keep up. They're going to be short meals. So these people are eventually going to be going hungry. They're not actually going to get the supplement that they've been receiving right now. These food banks are supposed to be a stopgap. They're not supposed to be a permanent solution, and they're not supposed to be a fix-all when it comes to people not being able to put food on the table. Right now, a lot of people are relying on them as some of the only source of sustenance that they can receive, okay? So, the lowest counties in the country that are affected by the food insecurity crisis. When I say lowest, I mean the least amount of effect from the crisis are actually in North Dakota, okay? So it is Burke County from 2018 and projected to be Steele County in 2020, both in North Dakota. Now, a lot of that has to do with population. It's also one of the reasons why I moved to North Dakota, because the population is smaller, so there's less competition for basic resources. And I've experienced that in many ways throughout my time here, especially when we talk about things like the ammo shortage. But moving from there, the most affected, the highest effect that the food insecurity crisis has had as a county in the country is Jackson County, Mississippi, which was already a very low income area, but it has been affected extremely by this food insecurity crisis, and it's projected to be affecting 37% of households in Jackson County, Mississippi by the end of this year. And that's huge. That's a third of every household in that county is not going to have enough food to put on the table. Things we really have to consider, okay? So, here's why this is a dangerous indicator of SHTF to come, okay? Because this doesn't just fix itself overnight. These aren't things that we can just repair immediately. We are now in a situation where people who have never been starving before are. We're now in a situation where the projections of how many people are going to need to be helped on an annual budget basis are triple from what we expected, okay? And we're also seeing where 1 in 8 to 1 in 6, to in some counties 1 in 3 American households aren't eating enough food and don't have enough food for their families. That puts us on a time clock, because basically if people can't receive some kind of a situation where they can eat and they can provide for their families in a short amount of time, this is going to become exponential. As you can tell, we're talking 1 in 8, turning into 1 in 6, turning into 1 in 3. What comes after that? I would say half, correct? Well, that's only if things keep going in the direction they are. And of course, we all hope that they improve, and we all hope that this doesn't escalate or spin out of control at some point. But it's something we should at least prepare for and possibly expect, because things have not improved since March, and they don't seem like they're going to anytime soon. So we need to prepare in multiple ways, okay? Because not only are people going to be facing food insecurity, which means you and I both need to prepare to not be able to eat, in the sense of we might be facing that same insecurity. Maybe we lose our income. Maybe we lose our ability to put food on the table from whatever source we were accessing before, due to scarcity, due to the inability to pay for it. So we need to be preparing to have food on hand, additional food storages to make sure we can eat, okay? But you also need to have food on hand and additional food storages for those who are part of your life that might not be able to eat or might not even be eating right now, whether or not you even know about it, because a lot of people have too much pride to let you know, hey, we're actually not eating enough food. Who really wants to admit that to anybody, correct? So make sure you're preparing to have enough food for those around you just in case they decide that they need the help. And you want to be able to provide for certain people, of course, because it's something we should all want to do, is help our community and help the people that we love and cherish, and then we want to make sure don't go starving, okay? But the slippery slope there becomes a situation when you're the only one that can provide sustenance to the people around you, and then those people know that, and then the competition for that sustenance grows, okay? We're seeing people who are driving Mercedes Benzes going to food banks to get their Thanksgiving meal because of what this pandemic has done to them financially. Those people are not prepared to suffer necessarily, and they're going to do what they have to do to avoid that suffering for as long as possible. And a dangerous indicator of SHTF is starvation, because when people starve, they become desperate and they become willing to act and willing to do things. So not only do we have to prepare to feed ourselves, to feed those around us, possibly to keep the peace in many ways, but we also have to be prepared for the people we don't know and the people we're not willing to help that decide we have to help them whether or not we agree. Okay? So these are things that we have to watch out for. I'm not saying that's what it's going to turn into, but it is something we should at least prepare for, both mentally and physically when it comes to taking care of yourself. And I think we all know what that can mean. Okay? So listen, here's something I want you guys to digest, and here's something I want you to think about. Okay? And this is a quote from a history professor at Stanford. Okay? His name is David Kennedy. And here's what he said, and it's something that you should definitely consider. The Great Depression sparked a measurable shift in attitudes from rugged individualism to more cooperative means of dealing with crisis. Okay? So what that means and how we can unpack that is that the Great Depression pushed so many people to the brink that those people who used to be totally fine with the idea of individualism and taking care of themselves and self-sufficiency and reliancy, the things that we all care about the most here in the prepper community, suddenly became cooperative in a way that they would have never been cooperative before, once those bread lines started to line up. And once those people could no longer put food on the table, and once those people could no longer feed their families, suddenly that individualism went away. You can see how that could easily turn into a form of control when it comes to what's happening from our leadership. So these are things you need to consider. These are things that we should all prepare for now. And it is upsetting to me that so many Americans and so many households, especially with children, went hungry last week during Thanksgiving. Okay? We all know how rich some of these people have become during the process of the pandemic. We understand how this all works, of course. But more and more people than that are becoming more and more poor and more unable to put food on the table. So these are things we have to consider, things we have to prepare for, and I wanted to bring it to your attention because we just got off of a Thanksgiving holiday. Many of us probably had a good meal with our families, but many people in this country did not. And it's something we have to remember and prepare for, because those people are generally good people that just have fallen on very hard times. So, without anything else to say about the food crisis here in America and what's going on around the country and how we need to prepare for it, that's going to be it for Magic Prep.